5 years after China eliminated absolute poverty, its development experience continues to attract attention around the world, particularly across Africa. This is China-Africa Talk. I'm Gao Junya. What lessons can African countries draw from China's journey? Can China's poverty reduction experience be adapted to African realities? In today's episode, we bring scholars, journalists, and development practitioners from China, the Gambia, Rwanda, and Namibia. Janaba Sanko, Zhang Yanqiu, Patrick Rwangangabo, and Geronimo Kataya explore pathways to poverty reduction and sustainable development.
5 years ago, China eradicated absolute poverty, transforming the lives of hundreds of millions of individuals. So the question today is, what can the African continent learn from this? My name is Janaba Sonko, and with me today is Professor Zhang, professor at CUC, Patrick, who's a journalist from Rwanda, as well as Geronimo, who's a founder of a trust fund. Thank you so much for joining me, lady. And gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me here. So to lay the foundation, let's now get into what poverty actually means to all of you. Different dynamics, different countries. What does it mean to you, Professor Zhang? Is it income, infrastructural development, the lack of education, the lack of health? What does poverty actually mean to you?
I think you mentioned most of the perspective for poverty, and of course the low income, the lack of resources, and also the limited healthcare, and also lack of the infrastructures. So all of this I will regard it as a poverty and people's life. People struggling over food, over the basic life supplies, road, transportation, and they cannot enjoy life freely. I regarded this as a poverty.
Yes, so Patrick, what does poverty mean to you?
Yeah, I think first of all, in my opinion, there is no single correct definition of poverty, but so far there is consensus that any definition of poverty needs to acknowledge particular things like social, economic, and cultural context. And so far the existing knowledge has categorized poverty into two different categories, like absolute poverty and relative poverty. So it can also be important to understand the difference of these categories. We see the absolute poverty where as severe deprivation of basic human needs like food, shelter, safe or drinking water, education, and for instance sanitation. And this is measured based on global fixed standard, like for instance where a person can be living on less than $2 per day. This is actual survival.
Yeah, so let me come in there. Where does Rwanda fall into the two categories that you just talked about?
Yeah, I was just about to talk about a second category where we see as a situation where household income or resources is significantly below minimum income of society or where the family is living. So I think for us so far, we have passed first category. We are now comparing ourselves on global standard based on individual living standards.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. So Geronimo, what does it mean to you, poverty?
While I agree with the explanation of the co-presenters, so I also maybe want to bring in the perspective of the etymological or the origin of the word poverty. So it comes from actually the Latin word pauperica, which means destitution, referring to any situation or a condition where the basic needs or the fundamental basic needs are lacking to any specific maybe country or specific community. Poverty, it's actually, as my colleague has just highlighted, it is classified. It can be either absolute or relative, but also maybe in addition we can also say it is based on the situational context. It can be urban poverty, or maybe it can also be referred to rural. So the context, it's what is matters I think so.
That is very interesting. Depends on which country we're talking about,
Yes, yes.
the governance level, the socio-political environment, and the list goes on. So, Professor Zhang, I'll come back to you. 5 years ago, China declared that it has eradicated absolute poverty. So, at that point in time, as a citizen of this country, how did you feel when this announcement was made?
Yeah. You know, when Chinese government announced, we did a very successful achievement to lifted about nearly 99 million people out of absolute poverty, and also something like 32 counties, poor villages. All of this, you know, were lifted out of you know, absolute poverty. I feel so proud of my country, about my government. So this is really a miracle, not only in China but in the world. So which means, you know, the poverty reduction in China is not only for individual at individual level, but also for regional level. So which means the overall regional poverty was reduced, and also such large populations poverty was reduced. So this is really a great achievement in the human history. Okay, I'm so proud of that. At the same time, as a communication researcher, especially development communication researcher, it reminds me my experience in Africa. I remember when I walk in Africa, visit Africa, every time I walk in the capital city even, it reminds me of my childhood. So I always talk to my student, when I visit most of the cities in Africa, I think I returned to my childhood. So which means life was almost the same when I was young, like 30 or 40 years ago. So I question myself, how can China transfer our experience in fighting against the poverty to Africa? When and how African countries can make the same achievement? So I reflect a lot. At one side, I'm really proud of my country. On the other side, I worried, I think what we can do to Africa.
That's brilliant, because when this announcement was made, obviously, it did capture international attention.
Yes.
And I'm glad you mentioned that it is beyond China, and it is. So, Patrick, Rwanda, for the past 2 decades, we've seen how under the leadership of Paul Kagame, there has been massive investment in health, education, infrastructural development. But still, what do you think Rwanda can actually learn from the dynamics and the strategies that has been employed by China to actually eradicate absolute poverty?
Okay, I want to start with what Professor said, that whenever he visits Africa, he just remember her childhood. So I can say maybe to some extent Africa is still living in the past of China, because China has already passed a red line of poverty. I would say China has really made a good development. And let me tell you one thing. There is one policy China adopted, which is China Rural Agricultural Enterprise Policy, which has really had positive impact on poverty reduction. This enterprise has enabled rural population to participate in economic development and increasing their income. And also many and almost majority of the people has really benefited from these industries. These industries has really enabled rural population to be employed. So I think within the context of Africa, this is a relevant strategy Africa can learn from, and even Rwanda, as most of African countries still rely heavily on agriculture. So African countries, if they could adopt this strategy, having so many industries within the rural area which are there to produce agricultural product, it will also help population to be employed. And also it can even reduce number of rural population who migrate from rural to urban cities.
Yeah, so you think urban development and employment is something that Rwanda can really learn from when it comes to the strategies of China? We've agreed on that.
Yeah, as I said, taking an example of this rural agriculture, for us we are still relying on agriculture, and agriculture is being held in rural areas. So if we take this example and then implement these industries, many rural populations will get opportunity to be employed instead of relying on this agriculture, and sometimes they are not having tangible income. Yeah.
Yeah, employment and rural development, very interesting. So Namibia, middle upper income class country, but still we see how there's a lot of inequalities when it comes to the distribution of wealth in Namibia. So what strategies really can Namibia employ to ensure equality, you know?
Yeah, so the strategy that perhaps I have observed as far as China is concerned, first I see China has got true demonstration of good governance and that of stewardship. So when you are entrusted with certain maybe funds at a grassroots level, so the local government, say for instance, if you are entrusted with the funds, which is specifically meant maybe to implement certain projects, so we see how the tangible results turned out here in China. So, and I believe also that if we can emulate this example and we replicate it with good governance, stewardship, and the policy of integrity, so it can work, I think, based on our contextual situations. Yeah.
So you think corruption is a major problem when it comes to poverty eradication in Namibia then?
Somewhere in the process of the pipeline, when the funds are released, I think it's a point of concern to say, why is that Namibia has got a small number of population, but then when it comes to natural resources, it's got abundant natural resources. We have got the sea, we have got mineral resources, but yet certain percentages or big number of percentages is still languishing in poverty.
Yeah, so Professor Zhang, moving on, let's talk about criticism on the dynamics and the strategies that are used by China might not be able to actually apply in the African continent, for example, in Rwanda and in Namibia, due to political difference in governance, and the list goes on. So what is your take on this criticism?
But actually, I heard of those criticisms, but I think I agree or disagree. And at first, of course, China, Africa, a lot of countries, African countries, we don't have the similar governance system. But I have to say that the great success of the poverty reduction in China largely rely on our very unique governance capacity. For example, China launched a very long-term development plan to reduce the poverty. At the same time, Chinese government can move and resettle a lot of resources systematically around the world. And also, China tried to keep such a plan very stable. It's like a decades long, very stable, and with a strong determination to do this campaign. At the same time, I think when this plan was implemented, and it's not only top down, it is also try to motivate a lot of grassroots to implement such plan. So I think it is the Chinese unique governance and political system contribute a lot, provide a very solid foundation for this great success. But at the same time, I don't think African countries cannot share. And we should understand what is the core idea for such great success. I think there's 2 points. One is this kind of a poverty reduction campaign, it's people-centered. And also it is what we call targeted, precisely targeted, with a precisely targeted measure. So this is a little bit different from what you mentioned. It's just partly because of the corruption. I think when we do the targeted measure, it's a very demanding. We have to identify what is the major challenges or problems in certain less developed regions, and we have to do, is it because of the lack of the agricultural resources, or the condition is not good for agriculture, or what? And also government carried out county to county, village to village, and household to household survey to identify what's the challenges for people. They try to find out, is it because they lack of job opportunities, or people lack of skills to make better job, or is it because of the public service is not good, such as lack of road or education, medical services? It is really what we call precise one. And also such effort is a national one. So we do the whole national survey And I think this is a really great effort. But behind that is the government really care about the people's life and the poverty reduction. I think those ideas could be shared by African countries. I know some African countries, when you deal with the poverty issues, and sometimes you get fundings from external, from some international NGOs.
Yeah.
So it's also based on some limited budget, and also it is with some kind of interference from outside. So when that project finished, and it finished, it's not a long-term stable one. At the same time, it's not a general, overall plan to fight against poverty. It's for some short period of time. So I think Chinese one is it's a national, stable, long-term. It's a top-down, and also with a very accurate grassroots effort.
Yeah. So, Geronimo, Professor Zhang talked about something very important, funding. And this is conversations that we've had time without number, especially recently when we've seen the United States of America stop the US aid funding, and other funding opportunities have actually stopped. So this simply means then the African continent has to take their poverty reduction initiative into their own hands, and also interference and when the funding finishes. So now what can the African continent do to ensure that when these fundings finish, they take initiative into their own hands to continue with the projects that have been started? Because what Professor Zhang actually mentioned is quite evident in most of these African countries. The moment the donor funding is over, it's over. And currently we've all seen the donor fatigue that is happening across the world.
Yeah, from my perspective, what we need actually to continue what we have started, say for instance, any projects that is implemented, to avoid being discontinued, we need to have self-sustainable project proposals that are in place, so that at least once the project is implemented, then we are certain that this project is not going to die a natural death, but then it is going to progress in a long term, not only in a short term, as the professor has indicated. And then we also need responsible citizens who can be able to ensure that the project continues to thrive. And then the government also needs to be able to intervene or to ensure that whatever the projects are implemented, be it at the grassroots level or community or regional, so they are responsible also to ensure that the projects are still continuing thriving.
Yeah. So theoretically, China actually put together the theory first, and then later they came into implementation, because Professor Zhang talked about the strategies that were the guiding principles when it comes to the eradication of absolute poverty. So in Rwanda, in Namibia, in so many African countries, we do have strategies on paper, theoretically, but most of the time implementation becomes a problem. Why do you think that is? You know, because we've seen that China had it on paper, implemented it, but that challenge tends to exist in the African continent. Why do you think that exists, and how can we change that to the benefit of the reduction of poverty in the African continent?
In my opinion, I think is sometimes what we prepare in the documents is not what we implement. So for African context, I think, as Professor said, in the process of eradicating poverty, we rely to some extent on the foreign aid funds, and which also can be another problem to Africa on the other side. But what I think is Africa needs to clearly define their development goals, and then they have to make sure that these development goals has to be aligned with within their own context. For instance, you need to be independent in terms of planning. You need to sit and then say, within our context, we are lacking this, and we need this to alleviate this poverty. Maybe if it is people living in dangerous zones, we need to alleviate this without considering what my funders is saying. So sometimes we have this influence of the funders, which we need to get rid of.
But how about the lack of continuity, you know? the lack of continuity Geronimo was talking about. Even sometimes the fact that, you know, the funds come and then the project starts, the continuity gap that actually takes place, which we've highlighted.
I think the issue of continuity, there is also issue of management and corruption. Sometimes we do have this issue in Africa. And yes.
But in China, I think the government want to, you know, help the people, but one of the measure is to stimulate the people, let them to be more motivated, instead of you just talk a lot on the top, blame the government or whether we have enough fundings. So we also educate the people, let them to be more motivated and to do the skill training. And also I share you some story. I know my former students, they were assigned to some villages to be the poverty elimination leader there. So they complain that at first they have to educate the people there to change their mindset. One is when the government will distribute some hen or cow or sheep for them to reproduce and to make money, and they add them. So they have to change people's mindset and to educate them how to do, you know, agriculture production and how to use the modern like e-commerce to sell their products. And they try to link their very local agriculture products to be sold and to be sold on the online. So I think it is what we call, it's not you just do blood transmission, and also you have to educate the people, make them to produce blood by themselves. This is also quite important. There's a top-down, you know, measure, but there should be basically bottoms-up effort.
At the end of the day. That is very changing of mindsets. It's key.
I think I can also add two more things. There is issue of security again. Without security, there is no development, and also issue of leadership. Sometimes we find maybe in certain African countries, if one ruling party is the mandate is done, the other ruling party will come, and then it will not continue on the same pace. They will just need to come up with their own maybe structured development. So the continuity will not be there. They will need to start over within their own perspectives.
So now you're touching on the leadership issue, the multi-party systems, the voting, and who comes next. I think that is also very key. Now let's talk about China-Africa cooperation. So how has China-Africa cooperation, China-Rwanda cooperation supported when it comes to the reduction of poverty there?
Rwanda and China has very strong relationships, and this relationship started around 1971. And since then, the signed agreement has, through this cooperation, has really benefited Rwandan people. I may say, for instance, the bilateral trade after the official visit of President Kagame to China in 2018 has reached around $496 million, including including $6 million in Rwandan coffee export. So you can imagine how, for instance, this $6 million has benefited thousands of Rwandan coffee farmers. Increasing their income and maybe encouraging the agricultural investment. So generally speaking, I can say the bilateral relationship between these two countries has really had economic impact on Rwandan rural community farmers.
That is amazing. That is amazing. And now China announced this May that there's a zero tariff policy, you know, when it comes to imports. So then now it's not only about the exportation of this coffee into China, but also SMEs can come in. It's beyond the farmers now, which I think is an amazing thing. What is your take on the tariff policy?
I think it is a good move for China's slogan of win-win situation. So far, for Rwanda, we're exporting chili, coffee and avocado. And recently, there is a agreement, our ambassador told us, agreement between Rwandan exporters to China, agreement of avocados. And we know China really needs a lot of avocados.
Yeah, and when we, and actually, before we started the show, privately, Professor Zhang was talking about how expensive avocados can be, and the cashew nuts. And then now there's, no tariffs now, so you can enjoy more avocados.
So that's also the benefit for China-Africa cooperation.
Exactly.
Within this free tariff, maybe we will see more other products coming to African markets.
Exactly. So what is the case in Namibia? What particular initiatives can you point at which has to do with China, Namibia cooperation that is actually contributing to the reduction of poverty?
Yeah, Namibia enjoys actually good relations with China, especially 2 points that I want to highlight here. The first one is road infrastructure. In Chinese philosophy, they say that if you want development, you should first consider constructing roads to bring about development in order to reduce poverty eradication. So we have got beautiful roads, and in Namibia, I think it's ranked as number 1, if not 2, having best roads in Africa. So especially there is one road that interconnect Oshikango and Otapi, and that has really smoothened in the trade relations. You can even go to Angola because it is near the border, and then you can be able to do trading. So that credit, it is attributed to China. And then the second one is also scholarships. So in order to bring about development and to reduce poverty, we need also young people with talents and energy to be inspired, or to be given, or to be educated, to be given that skills in order to be capacitated. And also when they acquire these skills, they can be able to implement it, those projects that speaks to the needs of the country. So those are some of the highlights.
Yeah, and actually I'm very happy you talked about education, because Professor Zhang was talking about how China has also used a strategy of changing the mindsets of its citizens to ensure that they want the change that they want and take it into their own hands. And as individuals who are in China and studying, now you've seen it, you've seen so many things, and then probably when you go back to your countries, you want more for your country. Are we in the same line? Is that so? How do you feel now with what you've seen in China, the development, the technology, and everything? Did that make you actually hungrier so that when you go back to Namibia, you do more in your own capacity to change the narrative of your own country?
A colleague went to actually to Guangzhou.
Yes.
And then when she came back, she said, I wish I could take Guangzhou to my country.
He just wants to uproot it and put it there, right?
Exactly. So actually, China has set a very good example to the rest of the world that we think with this example we can also really try to see the needs that speaks to our countries, and then we address the issues that are peculiar to our countries.
Yeah. So Professor Zhang, China-Africa cooperation, you are quite passionate about this, very passionate. Over the past decade, what are some of the things that you can point at that you think was very well implemented, that has actually helped when it comes to poverty reduction initiatives as well in the African continent?
And just now he said he wanted to take Guangzhou back home.
Yes.
And when I was in Africa, I wanted to take the cashew and
the avocado to
China.
China. It's a beautiful
thing.
thing.
It happened.
Yeah.
So I think China was regarded as a infrastructure giant country. As to China-Africa cooperation, I think it's really win-win. It's for the cooperation is not without any political conditions. So I think China, during the cooperation, China helped Africa to do a lot of in the field of infrastructure, not only road, but also like airport, power station, stadium, sports stadium. So I think those provide a very good facility for the country to develop. So that means infrastructure. At the same time, I think China also, when we do the infrastructure, it provides a lot of job opportunities to the local people. And on the other side is technology. I think China also tried to transfer the technology to Africa, including the scholarship including change the mindset and help the African young people to improve their capacity, comprehensively. I think those points are also very important. The other side is to train the government officials, not only young students, government officials, journalists, they also receive training or do seminars here. So they see China from their own eyes, and I think they also change their mindset, which means, what China can be achieved, set a very good example for Africans and build up their confidence. So Chinese story is a real story. If China can achieve that, and with effort, African countries can also achieve that sooner or later.
Yeah, that is very, I mean, this year is the year of people-to-people exchanges, you're right. So now let's talk about success stories for the African continent. Since we came, we've been talking about what can the African continent learn from China. Now let's talk about the success stories in Rwanda. Like I said in the beginning, they are brilliant success stories under the leadership of Paul Kagame, with investments in several areas. Rwanda is a very, very beautiful country. So what success story can you really point at right now when it comes to poverty reduction in your own way as a country?
Yeah, as many African countries still rely on funds from other countries.
Yeah.
Our president, Paul Kagame, always saying we need to be, yes. We need to find like homemade solutions.
Yes.
Yeah. What will happen if maybe my boss is chasing me away? So I have to have this in mind. Whenever this happens, I have another alternative option. So far, Rwanda, actually, we usually say like Rwanda counts like 32 years of birth because we had genocide.
Yes.
And everything was...
Which has taken a toll.
Yeah. So far, what we have is really amazing within this very short period of time.
Amazing.
Yeah, in terms of when we talk about development is very wide things, but it includes infrastructure, social living conditions, security, and other things. But I can assure you that Rwanda is now is labeled as Singapore of Africa, but we are yet to be there. But in terms of infrastructure, we are very ahead compared to some other neighboring countries. In terms of technology, we are performing better. Everything is online. There is no more contact with the people if we want services. Like if I'm staying here in China, want maybe particular document, I will apply it online, and then within 24 hours, I will...
E-governance.
Yes, I will...
that is amazing.
Yeah, there's e-governance, there is education. We are having a very increasing young generation who are enrolled in schools. We have passed the first level of poverty. Now people are performing better in terms of like financial. In terms of security, I know everyone knows Rwanda. We are very
amazing.
Actually, generally speaking, so far, Rwanda has really embraced very development under our president's leadership so far.
I am really looking forward to visiting Rwanda.
You're
the clean streets, streets
welcome.
are so clean, it's so beautiful. I'm definitely looking forward to that. So
they also have some national strategy to do the cleaning of the whole country. So I think Rwanda and China, we share a lot of experience with a lot of a national level plan and a national level approach. That matters a lot.
The fact that there's something to compare is a beautiful thing.
For what she said, we have a community work which we call umuganda. Like it's a general gathering at the end of each month.
To do the cleaning.
To do the cleaning. Around the city.
That's amazing.
Also, that build the national identity and make people feel they belong to this nation.
Thank you, Professor. We have slogan which says "Ndi Umunyarwanda." You know, before what leads to genocide in 1994 is we had divisions saying, for instance, Tutsi,
and
for you,
Hutu.
you are Hutu. But for now, we no longer have these divisions. We are all under this term Ndi Umunyarwanda, which means there is no two Banyarwandas. I'm Munyarwanda, you are Munyarwanda. Actually, we don't have any ethnic group. We share the same culture, language, everything.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that is amazing, because identity crisis is
Yeah.
also something that is actually taking a toll on Africa and its initiative for poverty
Yeah.
reduction,
Yeah.
which affects security.
Yeah.
So that is a brilliant thing that because Africa should also embrace learning from Africa at the end of the day,
Yeah.
which I'm about to come into
Yeah.
before we wrap up. So Namibia, what are the success stories in Namibia? Because we've seen that it's an upper middle income class country.
Yeah, with regard to this point, Namibia should be noted that it gained independence in 1990, and there are, of course, successful stories after independence. So we have got to political stability is very good, actually, and we have got to the democracy also in Namibia is thriving well. We have got to freedom of expression. Whenever maybe, say for instance, the masses are not happy with certain situations, they have got that right to express their views. They are also in the area of, say for instance, maybe education, literacy level. So we have got so young people that have received education so far, and we are proud about that. In terms of also food security, say for instance, or health, Namibia is progressing well, actually. Yeah, in so many areas.
So based on our conversation here today, we have concluded that poverty is actually intertwined. You know, everything has to be put in place. All sectors have to be put in place to ensure that poverty reduction is actually something that is realized. But before we leave, Professor Zhang talked about something very important. Professor Zhang talked about the fact that sometimes it's a personal initiative. You know, for example, Geronimo, in Namibia, you are a founder of a trust fund, a development trust fund in your own community, and you're using your trust fund that you founded to actually support your community when it comes to several initiatives. So it's important to also talk to us about, at a personal level, the amazing job that you're doing when it comes to the reduction of poverty in your own community, in your own little way.
Yeah. So thanks very much. I was actually confronted with the question of death. To say, if you die, what will you leave behind that the future generation will remember you? Yeah. So that digital footprint we are talking about is the one that confronted me, that reality confronted me to say, I need to empower my community by facilitating something that I can leave behind, that the future generation can be able to remember, and then also they can be able to build on and continue to develop the community further. So that is now the finding of the NGO called Opalo Karangwa Development Trust, which for me, I believe we have done a couple of things to the best of our ability by empowering young people, finding schools, and then also in that community where there was no potable water, so we tried to the change of mindset and also instilling the skills to the elderly to understand where we are heading to, where we are coming from. And then when we implement all this, so the community is actually excited about
It's a brilliant thing. Congratulations for the amazing work that you're doing for your community. We talked about bottom up. You know, it's beyond the state, the president, the ministers. It's about what the grassroots is also doing to ensure that, you know, there's change. I know you're a journalist, but journalists, we've seen how now journalists are taking it into their own hands to put up reports that are ensuring poverty reduction for particular communities. What initiatives, you know, what are you doing in your capacity as that to also, you know, spread the word, to create a change?
Yeah, I think my own role is nothing besides reporting the major issues that are affecting society.
Very key.
Yeah, which is my own responsibility. The rest is for the readership to address what I'm bringing on the table.
Yeah, but information leads to change at the end of the day, which is brilliant at the end of the day. Professor Zhang, what is your major takeaway from today's discussion?
I think understanding each other still matters a lot for future cooperation, for Africans to understand China, for Chinese people to understand Africa. So based on that understanding, we have to, you know, we have to work a lot to build that understanding. And of course, we have to change a lot of experience in terms of governance. I still stress the importance, the significance of governance, not only inside one country, but also in Africa continent generally.
Yeah.
So how to improve the governance and what they can learn from China in terms of governance in the long run and the long-term plan and the national effort, national coordination and the down-to-the-earth implementations.
Yeah.
So those experience should be deserve a lot of studies.
Yeah.
It is true that China's emphasis on long-term planning, targeted policies, infrastructure investment, and capacity building offers valuable lessons for African countries. Of course, China's experience cannot simply be copied and pasted. Sustainable development ultimately depends on solutions tailored to each country's unique conditions. That's it for this edition of China-Africa Talk. You can find us on major podcast platforms and on Substack. Just search China-Africa Talk. I'm Gao Junya. Bye for now.